everyone, this is Kerri Keffeler and welcome to my Encasing Silver tutorial. Today I will be using a piece of silver foil, my favorite tool, the bent steel rake, white opaque from Tapestry, and two other Tapestry colors, transparent amber or topaz, and purple. You can use the lighter versions or the medium versions. I wanted to show in this tutorial my favorite way of encasing silver foil in my beads. I like to give a lot of my beads that little extra shimmer. I don't use dichro very often, but I absolutely love the effects of silver foil. You can use silver leaf for this as well, although I find that it's not as stable and as sturdy as the foil, so I don't typically use leaf. And the reason I need to have a sturdier silver in there is because the heat of the glass that encases the silver will sometimes cause the fine silver leaf to totally obliterate due to the heat, and we want to preserve that silver. So for this tutorial, I recommend silver foil. I'm starting off with a base bead in white. This is my Tapestry white, and the reason why is I want to have some light coming through. Once I've encased this bead, I'm going to be pressing it, which means that it will flatten quite a bit and it will cause the silver foil to break apart underneath the encasement layer, which is going to yield some beautiful effects, but it's really good to do white as your undercoat color. Now I've marbled that first little footprint of glass, and I've done that so that I can eliminate any bubbles that are in there. And if you want a larger bead, as I'm creating here, it's a good idea to widen that footprint a little bit. I start with a narrower footprint because it's just a lot easier to get bubbles out if it's a smaller bead. You can always add to it later, as I'm doing right now. I'm adding a little bit to one of the ends of the bead and also to the other. And the reason for this is so that it's easier to taper those ends. I like to do that slight taper because it makes it so much easier to keep the shape that I'm looking for, which is basically a bicone. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you'll see why this is important as we go along. I always try to make sure that I shape and marble my bead in such a way that I don't have to worry about the bead hole being sharp or having any jagged edges at the end of the bead. If you can take care of this during the course of building your bead, you'll be so much better off at the end, and you won't have to worry about that at all. So I do want to make this a fairly good sized core for this bead, so I'm doing a gather of the white glass and building it up. And for speed, it's easier to just do a large gather and then apply it to the bead, or you can do a smaller swipe application of glass as well if you prefer. I find that this way is not only faster, but it actually puts less stress on the bead release also, which helps prevent breaking. So here we go, just applying it to the center. I want to try to keep the edges of my bead nice and tapered. They're not a pointy taper, it's a blunt taper, but that helps to keep that bicone shape. I'm working above the flame so that you can see what I'm doing. And I'm just applying a little bit at a time now. So I don't need to have a whole lot more volume. I'm getting pretty happy with the size of this core. Now you can experiment with other colors in the core instead of white, but you'll see the effect that this will give later, and you might want to give this a try. But you could also try other colors. I just don't recommend something like ivory because ivory is very reactive with silver. The color of this core will change a little bit because of the silver and also because of the encasement colors we're using. So I would recommend stick with the white, but then try different colors to encase with other than the colors that I've tried here. These are just some of my favorites, but I think blues and greens, pretty much any transparent color over silver foil looks spectacular. You can use this as a background bead and apply a design on the surface, which I do often, or you can just create this bead to be a beautiful bead all on its own. Now I'm going to do a free form press, just using my marber, but if you have a press like a Zuzi press or a lentil press of some kind, or any shape really, this bead works beautifully within a press. And that's one of the advantages to doing white as your core. It's a nice soft glass, so it heats really well even through the transparent outer layer, and it's easy to press. So the goal for this particular bead is to fully encase that core in the silver foil. I've torn a strip, laid it down on my tabletop, picked it up with the hot bead, and now I'm just marvering it with my handheld marver. I'm burnishing it in. You want to be sure that it really sticks everywhere thoroughly, because when you reintroduce it into the flame as you're adding your encasement layer, you don't want it to burn away. So I still need to add a little bit of foil to some spots that I've missed. Again, laying it on the tabletop and picking it up with my bead. Marvering it in, and it doesn't hurt to have multiple layers of silver foil as well. That will keep it from burnishing away or burning away in the flame when you reintroduce it. With one of my other tutorials that I used silver foil, the goal was to completely melt that silver into the bead. That is not the goal of this particular bead. We want to preserve that silver. So the colors that I'm using are Tapestry transparent amber and purple. And I'm starting off using the purple on the ends. I usually do the darker colors on the outside and do the lighter colors in the middle, or I mix them up from time to time. Whatever color you choose, just be sure to do your ends first. When I'm encasing my ends, I do it over the edge of the core, covering that silver, and also covering a bit of the mandrel, and that helps prevent any of the white glass or of the core from seeping through. I want to make sure that's fully encased. I'm using my heat to focus that glass towards the mandrel. And this is such a great tool, this bent steel rake, because you can use the elbow of the tool, just the elbow of the rake, to gently push that glass towards the center. If you have other tools that you prefer to use, go for it. Any tool will work just fine. This is just my particular favorite tool. Again, marvering those ends and giving that a little bit of heat. You can use gravity as well to help encourage that glass to cover the mandrel. We want to just make sure it's fully touching the mandrel all the way around so that the center glass doesn't seep through. Now the trick with this is to try not to burn away that beautiful silver in the center. So just really focus your heat on the ends. So those look pretty good so far. And don't worry if some of the silver burns away. I've got a few little spots there where it looks like it has started to disappear. But for the most part, it's pretty evenly covered with silver still at this point. Now I'm going to do a swipe encasement. I want to make sure that the end of the glass rod that I'm using for my encasement layer is really molten. But this will take a little practice, because if it's too hot, it will actually burn a hole right through your silver. So it just takes a little bit of finesse, knowing right when to apply the glass. I like to do this diagonal pattern. It kind of varies it up. You can do it any way you like. You can go all the way around. You can encase with dots. That would be a really pretty effect, as long as you fully uncover the silver by the end. Any pattern that you do would be totally fine. You can see I've burned away a little bit of that silver by mistake there, but I'm just going to keep on going. So this is really an organic style bead, so it's not the end of the world if you lose all your silver, but the goal is to try to preserve as much of it as possible. I really want this bead to have a lot of sparkle. So I've got quite a bit of purple on there. Now I want to come in with the transparent amber. You'll find that when you use a transparent color over silver foil, it will really deepen the color considerably. So I use a lighter amber. You can use light or medium, but typically I use the light amber or topaz. It's also called topaz. Again, now just getting the end of my rod nice and hot, lifting it out of the flame and applying it over the silver foil spots that are still exposed. This is going to be such a pretty bead. I absolutely love these particular colors together. If you've watched my hollow bead tutorial, you'll know that I love these colors because I use them in that tutorial as well. But again, you could have a lot of fun with this. You could do greens and blues and throw in some purple in there. Mix them up. or even just do a solid color. That silver foil is going to give you a beautiful effect in the end. Just make sure that you cover all the foil bits as thoroughly as possible. And when you're doing a swipe encasement like this, you do want to press gently down on the glass in order to push any air out of those spots. You might accidentally create a little pocket of air, which will create a bubble. And this is also why I'm using my bent steel rake. The little elbow is so handy for just encouraging that glass to lay flat and making sure that there's no air trapped in behind. We really want to try to avoid bubbles throughout the whole process as much as possible. Now I'm going to go back to shape my bead. I want to make sure that I've covered all the silver foil. And again, very gently marvering. You don't need to melt this bead super hot. You want to still preserve that silver foil, and believe it or not, even though it's encased, if you overheat it, it still will disappear under your glass. So it might take a little practice just to get the heat just right. Again, heating it a little bit, marvering it back into a bicone. Always focus on those ends because I really want to make sure that I'm going to have a nice puckered end at the end of the bead. No sharp edges. And coming in with my razor or my rake again. Just using that a little bit when I need to. And marver. Again, at this stage you could use a press if you like. But I wanted to keep this particular demo simple because I wanted to really just focus on the colors and the encasement more than pressing a particular shape. So the base of my desk is a tile, a slate tile, and it works great for marvering and pressing my beads. Once you've given it a press with your marver, or you've had it in a steel or a brass press, you want to make sure you really introduce it back into the flame. Now look what we've got. What's happened is that silver has broken apart. The white glass underneath has some beautiful color. And I'm just going to keep it just a little bit warm there and touch up the ends with my marver to create an oblong shape. Doesn't have to be perfectly round. I hope you've really enjoyed this tutorial. This is such a fun bead to create, one of my absolute favorites. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've really enjoyed this tutorial. Please be sure to leave a comment, let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed it, click that like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.